have contracted the virus, would they have still died from that stuff in 2 days from now? Like, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, how can they decide what the? I mean, that if the virus brought on something that complicated those diseases that they already had, I mean, that's what they're saying. People with diabetes, people that had asthma, and people that had, lung problems, and they were the most susceptible. That was the shit that was going to kill them, like to stay away from it for sure. So, I mean, I guess that it is a reason that they died, because if they wouldn't have got COVID in the first place, the thing that affected those things more severely than other shit, they still would have been alive on the medications that they take, and, it would just been a life sentence.
Well, that's the whole thing. Would they? If the patient, let's say there's 3 patients, one with Alzheimer's, one with coronary thrombosis, one with diabetes. If the prognosis for all 3 of them was that they were going to die in 3 days, and then they're in a nursing home, let's say they're in a hospice, right? So a hospice is specifically made for people who are going to die. Now, as a result of being in the hospice, they come across other patients who have the coronavirus, and now the pathogen is in their blood because they came into contact with these people. It doesn't make sense to say, well, the coronavirus killed them. They were going to die anyway. Now, if they had the diabetes, etc., and the prognosis was they're going to live for 5 more years and then they die in 2 days, then I would say, yeah, cause of death is coronavirus. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think what's happening.
Right.
Huh?
I agree with that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like that,
so I don't know what to believe.
If they're diagnosed to die in 3 days, and they have it just because they were in the same. I mean, they could even be already dead, right, and still contract the virus from other bodies that had it. Could they? I mean, is that?
Well, if they're already dead, I would imagine if they came into contact.
How are you going to contract the virus if you're not breathing anymore? I don't get that. Unless somebody injected it.
Because the body is still just laying there. I'm talking about, so like if there's, say, somebody, there were 15 people that died of coronavirus. And then there was one guy that actually died from a legitimate heart attack. If you put his body in the same area as those bodies, will that body that had the heart attack have the virus? Even though he wasn't living when he was put in there with them.
I can explain how that might happen. Not that scenario which you specifically laid out, because that means that it'll have to jump from one gurney to the other gurney. Here's how it could happen. You're in a hospice or you're in the nursing center, a nursing home, or you're in a hospital, right? Now the nurses have to take care of you. Now the nurses and the coroner declare this one particular person dead. But prior to touching his body, they touched somebody who had coronavirus, and they have it on their gloves. Now they're touching the dead person. The dead person now has the pathogens from the other people. I can see how that can be, on their body that way. But the new mandate is if you assume that they had coronavirus, even if there's no proof of complications, you have to put down cause of death, this fucking disease. Now that's not just stupidity. That's murder. And that's not murder. That Cuomo should be, the governor of the state, the New York State, when he said he signed a directive. He signed a fucking directive mandating that COVID patients from hospitals have to be accepted in nursing homes. Nursing homes are where the greatest selection and concentration of the COVID, especially in New York State, was located. So here you are, you've got these people who tested positive for the virus. You're now switching them, taking them out of the hospital, and you're putting them into nursing homes who have with patients who have underlying conditions, who are very susceptible to any kind of disease, a cold, etc. And now you're increasing the risk of their having coronavirus and of dying themselves, which is what happened. I would sue if a relative of mine died that way. I would sue Cuomo for attempted fucking murder, not just negligent homicide, but attempted murder, because he knew the dangers. He had a press briefing where he had the slides, and he said the nursing homes are very, very susceptible to this disease, and we have to take care of our dear, beloved aged. And now all of a sudden you're signing a directive to put everybody right next to them? Go fuck yourself.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I will say just a quick story of personal on a personal note with that. Both my parents, and I think I've mentioned this on the show, but both my parents tested positive for the coronavirus. My mother was, going through beating cancer. They found cancer on her tongue.
About that.
And it just so happened to be that she was going through radiation treatment at one of the largest hospitals in our Ohio State hospitals, and so the largest hospital in our state. And so while she was in there getting these treatments, happened to be, I think, maybe in the February, so it's like in the February time frame. Anyway, they ended up getting rid of the cancer and stuff. She ended up being cancer-free, thank God. But so she's been recovering from this. But it turns out that while she was in the hospital, she was exposed to a nurse who had gotten the coronavirus. And my father had been sick with what he thought was the flu. And it was almost like my dad had not even watched the fucking news. Like, I would talk to him on the phone, and he's like coughing up a storm. He's like, I just got the flu. I'm taking some vitamin C and this and that. And both my parents are like about in their 70s. So I'm like, Dad has been watching the news. He was like, I just got the flu, blah, 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 blah. So this was before they found out. Yeah, this is before they found out that they were in contact with this nurse. So they were required, they got tested, and they both came up positive. But by the time they got tested, they were both recovering. So my mom didn't even really get that sick, and my mom's got diabetes, she has cancer, and this, and that, and the other. Well, I wasn't around them and stuff, but they were on quarantine until April 20th. I went and visited them on April 21st. Actually, it has nothing to do with the story. But about a week and a half later, my mom had to go back to the hospital.
Smoked them out?
Yeah, smoked them out. But about a week and a half later, my mom had to go back to the hospital for something. This is a week and a half after they were on quarantine. After they were told they can mingle with people, this, that, and the other, no problem. So she went back to the hospital. They gave her another test, and she came up positive again. So my mom was off quarantine for close to 2 weeks. And then when she went back, she tested positive again, even though she was having no symptoms, completely recovered from it whatsoever. So they subsequently put her back on quarantine for another 10 days or so. Point of this is that every time they put her on quarantine, never once before she got off quarantine did they give her another test to see if she was still positive. They said, you just wait this certain amount of time, and then when you get off, you're fine, so long as you don't have fever, things like that. So I find it interesting that supposedly she's not sick, supposedly she doesn't have it, but she is still testing. She could still very well test positive to it to this day. But she's off quarantine, but if she was to go get tested again, they would probably put her back on quarantine and then not test her again before they let her out.
Yeah, and that's one of the dangers of this testing, because I don't trust the government with the testing nor with the results. If they're going to inflate the results of the people who died, I don't think they're going to have any problem inflating the results of people they say have tested positive but probably haven't. Your parents are a case in point. They're a prime example of how people with underlying conditions do not have to succumb to this so-called deadly lethal disease. Especially now, if they contracted it and they survived and they have the pathogens in their bodies, which are now creating antibodies to prevent them from any type of serious ailments as a result of coming into contact with somebody else who may have the coronavirus, it's a pretty good bet to me, as a layman. I'm not a doctor, but as a layman, I would say they would never ever get COVID-19 ever again for the rest of their life. I don't think they have anything to worry about.
Right.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though.
But, it's...
That is a good thing, and especially because I was saying, my parents are in their 70s, And like, so we were very concerned because and both of them, my mom obviously was having serious health problems during the time that this should have taken her down. But that brings me into a point we kind of talked about a little bit, is this supposed whistleblower who came out, and it was Associated Press report and stuff, who is saying that the virus is going to lay dormant in people until around the winter time, and then that during the winter we're going to have, quote, the darkest winter that humans have ever seen in history because of this virus supposedly laying dormant. But everything that we know about viruses would say that shouldn't be the case, that people should have antibodies build up to protect themselves from it. But for some reason, this whistleblower is coming out saying that this is different, that it's not going to be like that, and that we're not prepared for it.
Yeah. You know what else might be coming out too? In addition to the whistleblower, there'll be people coming out and saying, well, they've built up the antibodies, and they are resistant to this particular strain of COVID-19, but they're not resistant to the new strain, which is going to mutate. Do you know how many fucking different stories I've had about this goddamn disease? I have read stories about two virologists who have said, this thing is only like the flu. Don't worry about it. They're virologists, okay? They're the people who study virology, microbiology, and they're supposed to know about this shit. Then I've also read two articles about two other virologists who have said this thing is the most lethal fucking thing since the bubonic plague. Then I heard on a show of a guy who says that he was part of the bioterrorism unit way back in the Reagan era, and he says that if you take this particular virus and put it under an electron microscope, you're going to find out that it's man-made. So that it may not have just escaped from Wuhan, but it may have been created for the specific purpose of, destroying the world. So, and since he was part of the USA bioterrorism unit, then it's possible that the United States did this and is blaming China for it, because Fauci and some other people supposedly funded this Wuhan lab in China some years ago, and I think they may even have visited the lab, So who's to say about that? And now, from what you're telling us, of these, this particular person talking about how it's going to, this whistleblower who's saying that the winter's going to be the darkest winter because now it's going to lie dormant, and then the CDC has been saying all along there's going to be a resurgence come October and November. There's fucking 13 different fucking stories flying around. I say we hang up every fucking traitor in Congress and start all over again. Of course, after they have a fair trial, naturally.
I'm ready for a reset, dude. I mean, it's time. Everyone needs to change. It's all, you have to earn your shit back. I mean, who knows, how do you just can't keep the corruption out unless, I don't know, even if new people get involved, eventually they will be corrupt too. It's just like it leads to that.
Well, my solution to that is this. I consider... Huh?
How do you do it fair for everyone? You know what I mean? And consistently keep it fair and, I don't know.
Here's what I would do if I were the president. Number one, I would have machine guns at the border. There wouldn't be any fucking bullshit about catch and release. Do you have any type of contraband? Do you have any type of diseases? Nobody's allowed to broach the Rio Grande. Nobody's allowed to come in. You try to come in, I'm shooting your fucking brains out. No fucking capture of illegals. Secondly, in order to answer your particular question about this, I would institute that every elementary school, every high school makes it a mandatory course that the students have to take logic and critical thinking. Now, I don't know of any high school in the country that has that as a course, which is part of their mandated course. Because if you had that, then it would be easy to spot the bullshit from politicians. because the electorate would say, wait a minute, I don't quite understand what you're saying. Could you explain that further?